I always try to sneak in one sip before I get
Before you
going.
go.
And ladies and gentlemen, we're already live. It's the customary open. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 47 of the Adam Makes Beer Industry Pro podcast. Today I'm excited to be chatting with Amy Mast of Craft Leadership. Before we get rolling, let me give a shout out to our fantastic sponsors that make content like this possible. Starting a brewery is a big step. Blickman Engineering is here to help. Since 2006, they've equipped hundreds of nano breweries for success. Their new 3.5 barrel Pro Surface electric brewing system cuts maintenance and saves at least 30 minutes per brew day with powerful under kettle heating. From 1 to 15 barrel brew houses to keg washers and grain mills, Blickman has what you need. Ready to go pro? Contact Phil or Tom at ProSeries at blickmanengineering.com. Blickman Engineering is a proud sponsor of the channel and loves to help brewers at every stage of their journey. Tracking and managing the financial health of your brewery is a primary pillar of success. Check out my boy David Lentz at Brewed Fiscally. This man has the industry experience and skills you need so you can focus on growing your business. Bookkeeping, fractional CFO support, financial management system design, business plan review, hit up your boy. Check him out at brewedfiscally.com or shoot him an email at david@brewedfiscally.com. He's good people. Speaking of David, I was with David at OCBA last month, whatever it was. Time is a bit of a relative notion these days, but we're at OCBA and I had a chance to catch up with today's guest. Amy Mast currently serves as a craft partner at Craft Leadership. Amy also has a background in athletics, having worked as a certified athletic trainer for 18 years, competed in soccer and track at the collegiate level, and played women's professional football as a running back. Now she serves brewery leadership teams and helps them unlock their full potential. Amy Mast, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Adam. It is a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. Well, I've got to tell you, I did not know the full range of your bio there, and it is probably one of the more far-ranging bios that I've read in the course of doing this podcast. That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Yeah, and that's very abbreviated. I've done triathlons. My athletic career has been very diverse. But it really is rooted in just kind of natural, somewhat, God-given abilities, being able to kind of pick up athletics naturally and easily. And really, though, the heart of why I have always gravitated towards athletics is the team camaraderie. That's what I love most, and the physicality of it is still enjoyable, but it's secondary to the community aspect.
For sure. So, and this just pops into my head. So where does competition, where does the competitive drive for you fall in that? Is it lower than those other things?
That's a great question. I would say the competitiveness falls after community. I'm always drawn to things for the first time because I am drawn to being a part of a team, first and foremost. Secondly, I'm not risk averse naturally, and I don't doubt my ability to pick it up. I'm like, I can figure it out. So, I'll go try it. And thankfully, it's been a strategy that's somewhat worked for me in a lot of different areas. Don't know why, but it tends to have worked. So.
Sure, and we're kind of leaning into this a little bit, but let's take a look at your career path, because you've not been with Craft Leadership forever. Kind of walk us through that a little bit. What was your path into this industry like?
Sure. Yeah, it really is connected, even though it doesn't seem maybe like it at face value. But when I decided to go into college, you have to pick a major at age 18, which is awfully young, to be figuring out what do I want to do with the rest of my life is kind of what you're told. as we know now, most people do not stick with their same career path for their entire lives. Not anymore. That used to be true. That was the norm, but now it's not the norm at all anymore. People definitely have multiple careers throughout their lives in today's day and age, anyways. And so when I started out, went to college, went into sports science because I loved athletics, I loved science. The two just meshed really well together. And then so the 18 years spent in athletic training was wonderful because what I ended up becoming is a liaison between athletes, the coaches, the parents, the physician, the physical therapist, because really an athletic trainer on a sideline of any sporting event is there for medical support. So if anybody gets hurt or injured in the event, then it's my job to go and care for that individual, that athlete, really be able to assess how serious it is. Can they still play? Do they need to come out? Do I need to get them to the emergency room, or is it maybe just a doctor's visit come Monday? What is that? And so the athletic trainer really needs to be that liaison to assess the situation, but then communicate it effectively to the athlete who's in pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you need to be able to communicate in almost like an emergency situation sometimes, and be able to make everyone understand and really take the leadership role in that injury scenario and know what needs to happen right now, what needs to happen in 2 hours, what needs to happen tomorrow, what needs to happen in a week. And then that communication to all of the necessary parties that need to kind of be informed as to what's going on. And so that's where I learned that what I loved about the job, right? And what I saw is that there's a need for that. And if an athletic trainer isn't able to do that, or there isn't one present, because as we know, there's different age levels where there's no athletic trainer on staff, and so the coaches are trying to figure it all out, or the refs, or whoever's on staff, or the parents. And but those events where an athletic trainer is able to be there, that's the gift, is that they're trained to be able to be that communication leadership role in assessing the situation. So I spent 18 years doing that. In the process along the way, as you would imagine, I got to witness a lot of leadership done poorly. If you take a look at athletics and sidelines and even interviews and things like that, you're going to hear from a lot of leaders in the athletic world that are just not doing leadership well. They're not quite sure how to do leadership well. They have knowledge of the sport, but maybe they don't have knowledge of how to communicate effectively, or to understand how, and not treat every athlete the same, because as we know, we're all very, very different. What that sparked inside of me was a desire to go find something that is better than what I was witnessing. How can leaders become more emotionally intelligent, personality intelligent, team collaborative intelligent, relationally intelligent, really, to be able to be a better leader, to be a better coach, to be a better athletic director, to be a better administrator, whatever the situation is. I went looking, I went researching. I really had this heart for something better than what I was experiencing. I didn't know what that was at the time. So I decided, do I go back to school and get my MBA, and then, work on climbing the ladder, and so that I can be a part of the solution and eliminate some of these problems that I'm seeing. I didn't know what the right solution was going to be. But when I went researching, I found this organization called Giant. And I found the tools that they are promoting, I have created and are promoting for leaders to be able to digest, apply to themselves, and then use with their people. And I learned that you could get certified through them. And that was my first step. I was like, okay, well, it's way easier and faster and cheaper to get certified in their content than it is to go back to school and get my MBA. So why don't I try this out? So I did. And man, it was absolutely life-changing and career-changing, because what happened was I started to use all of the tools that I was being equipped with through that certification. I immediately started asking the coaching staffs and administrators, can I use some of this new knowledge and this new competency with your athletes? And so that's where I started. So I went to the head football coach one preseason, and as you may or may not know, during preseason of football, there's 2-a-days and sometimes even 3-a-days.
Sure.
And so these guys are being worked really hard in the heat of the day. August, it's super hot here in Ohio during that time. And so come Friday, the guys were wiped out. The coaches wanted to give them a little break. So I said, well, why don't you bring them into the classroom? I'll do some leadership team tools with them. And the coaches were like, great. Yeah, let's do it. And so we started that in preseason, and the guys loved it. The athletes loved it so much that they came to me in the training room. They're like, hey, can we keep doing that? Like even during the season, like now that preseason's over, I'm like, you go ask your coach. I don't need to ask, you ask. And so the captains went and asked their coach if they could keep doing it every Friday or Monday or whatever it ended up being. And the coaches agreed. And so we kept doing it throughout the season. And it had so much success with the quarterbacks and the coaching staff communication improving over the whole season, but then also to the entire team. They understood one another better. They had tools and language to be able to communicate more effectively with one another, such that their team was wildly successful that year. And anytime at the end of the season, playoffs and stuff like that, the reporters always want to come and interview all of the key players and stuff. And it was so fascinating because all the athletes wanted to talk about was how the leadership training that they were doing was transferring onto the field for them in every single game. And so then, of course, that came to, the reporters wanting to interview me as well and say, okay, what are you doing with these guys? They keep referencing this leadership training that you're doing with them. And so it really sparked interest. It took off. The coaching staffs wanted it. The rest of the teams in the community started asking for it as well. And so my career then, it was a matter of about a year that then I stepped actually away from athletic training even and started doing leadership development full time. And actually the company Giant ended up hiring me as well because I just was so integrated in and they had a role to fill. So I do still work directly for Giant. And but also, so a colleague of mine within Giant we got together one day and we're like, you know what, if we're serving anyone, which we're not working with a ton of clients, but when we do, we want to work with amazing clients. Like we get to pick kind of who we want to work with. And what it came down to is we decided that breweries are amazing organizations to work with. My colleague had already had a client, Creature Comforts, that he was working with. He's worked with them for about 8 years now, and really just coaching their leaders, coaching their teams, using all of the amazing tools and content, the same as what I did with the athletes. And so since he was already integrated in there, we decided, well, why don't we niche down and say, let's just see what we can do to serve the brewery world and help them develop high-performing leaders and high-performing teams and eliminate some of the drama that does tend to creep in to any organization that you run. And let's see if we can't empower them. So that's really, kind of the 5-minute story of my career path.
No, I think it's interesting too, especially through the lens of the field of play. So you were mentioning football before, and I'm a huge NFL nerd, and you can have some of your classic, like hard-nosed old school coaches like a Bill Belichick, but when you start seeing and sometimes maybe if you end up with the resume that he has, maybe that ends up working for you. But I do think it's interesting, increasingly you see more and more people talking about hiring communicators and leaders at that head coaching position. And I'm a diehard, always have been, Detroit Lions fan. So, things are getting a little better these days. But one of the things that I always find so interesting is the way the people that play for Dan Campbell talk about him as a person, and the way that he communicates with them.
Yeah.
And, I think a lot of times, and this is probably generally across any industry, I think a lot of times people can grow. It's almost like the Michael Scott from The Office scenario. He was a good sales. He was good in sales, and so he just kind of got promoted, right?
Yeah.
But doesn't mean he has those skills of leadership, communication, X, Y, and Z. Absolutely not. And they build the whole show on the concept, right?
Yes,
but yeah, I do find that so interesting now, how you see that even in fields like competition, like in sports, where you might not think it's some of the soft skill things that are helping people move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And you see that everywhere now, like what the shift away from those, what we knew worked from before, that dominating kind of leader that used to motivate. They would rely hard on motivating somebody by lighting a fire under their rear end, right? Like to get them to move. But as we all know from experience, probably, is that when you light a fire under someone's rear end, they're just going to get up and go sit down somewhere else. They're not going to stay up because they're not motivated internally. You're going to have to go and light a fire under that same person's rear end in a little while, right? Like soon. You're going to have to keep doing it. It's a never-ending cycle. If you're that dominating, you're kind of leveraging fear and manipulating the situation to get people to do what you want them to do. But instead, we tell people, light a fire within them. If you light that fire within your athlete or within your employee, within your leader, then you don't have to keep igniting it all the time and getting them to move. They're going to move because they feel that fire inside of them. So that's the analogy we love to use from that old school mentality of what we know from those dominating leaders from before, that was kind of typical, and to now where people are recognizing, no, there's a better way to do things. If we empower our people, if we employ them with the tools and the communication skills, then they're going to be so much more successful.
Absolutely. And so, let's dip into this conversation. So, ladies and gentlemen at home, you would be able to have, you might be able to see this also on Spotify, because it does go up on video on Spotify. We are going to attempt to leverage posting. If you do look in the show description below the video, if you're streaming on YouTube right now, or if you have access to the chat for this live stream, I do have the link to this document pinned. Amy, if we just kind of want to start dipping into this conversation about communication, I think that would be, I think it's time to shift right in there. I think we're ready for that.
Yeah, definitely a topic that I love discussing and talking about, because without effective, successful communication, there's all kinds of issues that arise, and it happens everywhere you look, right? Like if you look at your relationships at home, there's the high likelihood of communication breakdown from time to time. I don't know about you, Adam, but my husband and I don't always communicate effectively 100%
Get out
of
of
the
here.
time. I'm sure you're different. I'm sure you do. You have 100% successful communication 100%.
I'm in control all the time. I'm just a high level communicator. I never say things I don't mean, anything like that. So yeah.
Oh, shoot. Yeah. So no matter where you look, we all need better ways to communicate, more effective strategies for communication. And it never really stops. Like, we never get to that point where we've got it all figured out. We understand every single person in our world so well that communication is effective 100% of the time. It doesn't really happen. And that's really not necessarily what we're striving for, but we're always working to improve ourselves and taking ownership for our piece in communication. And what does that look like? So I love talking about communication. It really is the heart and the root of a lot of issues that go on inside of organizations, breweries included, is that the way we communicate establishes the culture that your people live in every single day. And so if you've established a culture where what gets communicated is only positive things, which doesn't sound bad, right? Like it actually sounds good. Like if we're only communicating positivity and telling people how good they are and how much of a rock star they are, and giving them encouragement, like, you guys crushed it today, you were so great, that's good. But if it's not, what if that's all people hear ever, is that they're a rock star, they're a rock star, they're a rock star? There's repercussions for that. That is a culture that gets created due to communication that's actually not healthy. Now, a lot of people struggle to kind of make sense of that, because that may be what they're striving for, is like, if we can just get the negativity out, if we can just get all of the critique out of our ecosystem, then everyone will feel good, everybody will want to come to work, everybody will want to do their job really well and effectively. But that's actually not the truth. And so that's one end of the spectrum, or one side of the pendulum. The other side is if you have a culture, due to your communication, that what gets communicated all the time is all of the screw ups, all of the times that have been, like, you only hear from your boss when you've done something wrong, or you only hear from people when they're critiquing and bringing, just saying what they see is wrong with everything around them, right? That's not a fun culture to be a part of either. That usually creates that culture of everybody's kind of walking on eggshells. People dread coming to work. It just isn't like, people come in, they're collecting a paycheck, they're getting the job done, and they're leaving typically. And they're trying to lay low and not to be the one producing the friction that's on the receiving end of the critique that particular day. And so that's the other end of the pendulum. And then there's another one in between, really, that is no communication at all. What if the culture that has been created due to communication is that it's apathy, because there's nothing being communicated in regards to encouragement or positivity or expectations, but then also there's nothing communicated when you do something wrong or when something isn't quite the way it should be. There's just nothing. And that obviously is a culture that is doomed to die. You're going to see a lot of turnover. You're going to see a lot of churn in those kinds of cultures, that there is just low expectation or no expectations going on. Now, what I would like to, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try to share my screen so I can reference a visual tool, because visuals are actually super helpful. Humans learn from neurolinguistics. And so a visual with colors and shapes is going to be remembered way more than anything anybody hears me say. So I am going to see if this will let me do it. Let's see if it'll. Oh, it wants me to upload a file. You know what I'm going to do instead, because it's way easier, is I'm going to cheat and share. I'm going to hold it to my camera.
Works for me. And I do like what you're saying, that sometimes people have this notion that
I should have grabbed this before, but
you're fine. You're fine.
I have a little cheat sheet that I can share right here, and I'm going to hold it to the camera instead. And this is what I was going to share.
That actually works.
Perfect. Okay. I love it. So this tool is called the Support Challenge Matrix. And what I just described for you in what I was just saying is when you create a culture where all people hear, what you're communicating all the time is high support, meaning lots of encouragement, lots of "you're a rock star, you guys are amazing, keep crushing it, just keep doing what you're doing." You never hear any kind of challenge. What that culture that creates is called a protector culture. And as you can see in the small writing, it says it's a culture of entitlement and mistrust. And now some people are a little confused as to that. It's like, okay, why does that create a culture of entitlement and mistrust? And so I like to explain it by saying that, if you're only communicating the good things, but yes, there's things that you're dissatisfied with, but you're not communicating them because you want people to like you, and bringing critique and sharing truth and expectations actually ends up making you put that at risk. Like, what if they don't like what I have to say and they're not going to like me anymore? And so therefore I'm just not going to share it. What people end up doing is they can't necessarily trust that you're telling them the truth all the time, because inevitably every leader is dissatisfied with something, or every person is dissatisfied with something. Like, they see things and they're thinking them, but they're not saying them. And then often what happens is there's this one fateful day where there's a blow up, right? As to like, oh my goodness, you've done this 9 times. I can't believe you're still not getting this right. And the person on the other side is like, 9 times? And you're just telling me now? Like, why couldn't you have told me 9 times ago and give me the chance to improve? Right. And so that's the mistrust that creeps in, is to like, is he really telling me what he really thinks, or is he just telling me what I want to hear? And then that entitlement is that when often what happens in a protector, like if I'm the communicator that is the protector, often I'm dissatisfied with something, but instead of bringing challenge and asking someone to go do it right, I just end up doing it myself, right? Like, I'll just go do it. I know how to do it. I'll just do it, right? And so what happens to the people that I'm leading is that they just are like, well, she'll just do it. Like, that's where the entitlement comes from, is like, hey, I've never been asked to do that before. Why should I do it now? Right. So it's that entitlement thing that is created when we're only communicating positivity and that high support. Now, the other one that I described is down here, that dominate culture. It's when people naturally communicate challenge or critique. And those are the folks that are wired to be able to see naturally, like, where the holes are, where the gaps are, where the insufficiencies are. And that's great. We love those people. We love people that are able to see that. But the thing is, if that's the only thing that's communicated, it creates a culture of fear and manipulation, because when that particular leader comes and says, they start being nice, people on the other side of that is like, oh, what do they want from me? Like, why are they buttering me up? They probably want something from me, or they're trying to get me to do something, because they've never really told me any encouragement before. Now they are, or they're just trying to use fear tactics to get me to go do something. So a lot of times it's threatening, or it's, if you don't do this, you get points against you, or you get deductions, or, whatever that is. That's that fear dominance kind of culture, where they're not balancing it out with encouragement and positivity. And then the other culture that I started to describe is abdication, where there's no support and no challenge. And that breeds a culture of apathy and low expectations. Now, that culture is, it's bleak, right? Like, nobody likes to work in those environments. It's kind of, the leaders barely show up. They barely ever communicate. There's no regular rhythms of meetings or emails. And if they do have them, they're very impersonal, right? And so often when that is the culture, there's usually some unhealth in the leadership, right? Like, they're struggling themselves. I've had different leaders that are going through things at home, and therefore it translates for them abdicating somewhere else. There's that saying that goes like, if you're a leader or an owner of a company that is knocking it out of the park at work, good chance, stuff at home is maybe not thriving. Could be the abdication at home, where vice versa. If you're going through and you're giving all of your attention at home, you're probably maybe dropping the ball on 1 or 2 things at work, if you haven't, created some sort of delegation system that's effective, right? So we all know this one. I don't think I've ever coached anyone that can't honestly say, oh yeah, I've abdicated here before, just due to circumstances, due to whatever. And it's nothing to beat ourselves up about, but it's something to communicate about and to be able to put words to, so that we can talk in a healthy way about how we are leading the people around us. Last but not least, and the one that we're all striving for, the one that I coach people to try to strive for, is this liberate quadrant. Now, the liberate quadrant is where It produces a culture of empowerment and opportunity. When you're leading or being led by someone who is not only giving you high support and encouragement as to like, hey, I thank you so much for going and doing that task. I know that's not on your list, but you saw that it needed done and you went and did it. That is so helpful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That's amazing. But then also making sure that when it's time to bring challenge and communicate expectations, that you're doing it in a healthy way, but also regularly. So my challenge for people, a lot of the people I coach, honestly, are in the protect quadrant in the brewery world, because they genuinely are just amazing people. They want to surround themselves with people that they like to work with, and they like to have customers that they like to hang out with and have a beer with, right? And so they're good at bringing support and creating that fun, healthy culture. But when it comes to telling people expectations or where they could get better, it's not a skill that they've learned and practiced, right? And so what I coach them with is normalize challenge in your team and in your world. If you start to normalize it, it becomes a skill set that you have, but then it also becomes something that your people are not afraid of anymore. Because if you're only bringing them challenge once a year during their performance review, and that's the only time that you're telling them where they can improve, how is that effective? How is that going to change anything in your organization? So when I coach a team or a leader, I usually say, all right, every single week, wherever your meetings are with your team, your check-ins, whether it's at the beginning of the week or whether it's at the end of the week, figure out where you can bake in bringing your people challenge. How can they get better? What do you see in them that they have untapped potential? And that's the way I tell them, I was like, this is the way to do it. This is an example. And be like, John, thank you so much. You're doing so well with this and this. What area I think you could improve on is in this particular area, your documentation, your note taking, or, that could be a little bit tighter, or it could be communicated more effectively to the rest of the team. Do you think that over the next couple of weeks, you could be a bit more intentional to try to improve on that one thing and get agreement back and be like, yeah, absolutely. You're right. That's the one thing that if I were to name, that I don't do awesome, that doesn't come naturally to me. And yes, I can improve on that, and I will intentionally do that. That's what it looks like to be in that liberate quadrant, because it normalizes challenge for your people such that that's what they understand. That's what they know as normal. And therefore, when it comes time to have maybe a little more difficult conversation, it's received well. It's received better because they know you're for them. They know you're fighting for their highest possible good, and that you have their back. Like, you're not going to be a yes man. You're not going to be just a person that is always telling your people what they want to hear. You're telling them, that you have their best interest in mind. You want them to improve and get better. So give me a little feedback on that, Adam?
No, that makes a lot of sense to me, because I feel like through my lens. So I am extroverted. I like peace and order around me. And so, like, things that are really chaotic can be difficult. Like I might have said, agreeable. I like being on good terms with people. And in general, I've done very well as a coworker and as a leader. But what I found was, the more leadership position situations I found myself in, I had to come to terms with this one really poisonous thing that I do, is I will see somebody do something that they're not supposed to be doing. And maybe I address it the first time, or maybe I watch it happen, or I address it once and then I figure, I addressed this once, this should be fixed. But then I watch something happen, and every time it happens, I get a little bit more upset, until the first time I see it, I'm not upset at all. But then I see it again, it escalates, it escalates, it escalates. And then I end up speaking to that person in a way that I don't want to as a leader, right? or not even that you're going to be like yelling or whatever, but my communication is going to be less effective because I know I'm agitated about this situation, right?
Right.
So especially somebody that's coming from like that agreeable, likes to have a positive vibe in the room. That's been something very, very big for me. And I've had to try to grow in the direction of giving honest, truthful feedback, right? Kind of looping in another concept, not everything is always amazing.
Right.
And I think you lose some authenticity or some credibility with people when everything is always roses, right? So yeah, I mean those are some of the high level things that were jumping in my brain as you were talking. So
that's perfect. Yeah. And that's a really good point that I'll make that you just referenced perfectly, is that people that, so all of us, none of us naturally live in the liberate quadrant. None of us. There is not a person that's listening to us today out of your million followers that that live in the liberate quadrant naturally. And that's the bad news. None of us are here naturally. Where we need to figure out and decide for ourselves, most of us either naturally live up here or down here. And that's just by nature. Like you had said that you're naturally an extrovert. There are those of us, often it's that thinker feeler kind of differentiation in Myers-Briggs, is like, if you're a thinker, good chance, more often than not, you are wired to be able to critique. Like you see what's not right. You see the holes, the gaps, the insufficiencies, the things that exist. Like that's just the way your brain is wired to think. And that's a really, really good thing. It just needs to be calibrated with support so that you're in that liberate quadrant. But if you're honest, you naturally live down here. What comes out of your mouth first often is critique or some sort of challenge to someone, just because that's what you see. Now, for many of us, often the feeler, people that are more driven by feelings than rationale, and I'm one of those, is we naturally live in that protect. We're good at bringing encouragement, but when it comes time to bring challenge, that feels awkward. It feels like it's difficult. And so we naturally live up here. And what we need to learn to calibrate so that we live over here in the liberate quadrant is challenge, learning how to communicate effectively with people with what we see and that honest truth telling situation. So what I've had leaders do in the past is go ahead and print off this tool, and you have it referenced in the notes there and in the chat, is go ahead and print it off and make as many copies as you need, but then give it to your people and ask them to scatter plot you privately, right? Like they're take it away and just put,
do it in front of me right now.
Do it in front of scatter plot me right now. Right. It's probably, you're going to get a little more honest answer if you let them do it privately. And you could have one piece of paper, and have your team kind of do it. And that way, you don't know whose dot is whose, but you have them scatter plot you and ask them, what are you experiencing on the other side of me in my leadership? Do I am I in the liberate quadrant for you? Do I bring you the right amount? Am I calibrating for what you need? Or do you feel like I'm protecting and not giving you honesty? Do you feel like I'm dominating and, too much excessive critique? Or am I abdicating? Do you think I'm abdicating you as a leader? And so that's a really brave, but really healthy thing to get feedback from your people. And so we often use this tool as a little scatter plot activity to get honest feedback from your people so that they know what they're experiencing on the other side of you.
Sure.
The last thing I'll say too is you reference is that you can acknowledge that you start somewhere, but know that you pendulum swing once you get fed up or frustrated, you pendulum swing down to dominate. When you know, what you were referencing as to like, you know, protect, because you see something, you tell them once, but then, you know, you expect them to do it. But when it happens again, like you start, the frustration builds.
Sure.
And then when the blow up comes out or happens, that we pendulum swing into dominate, and then it's all critique, right?
Sure.
Some people pendulum swing down to abdicate. They just internalize everything and they hold it all in and they squash it. And that's never good either. What we want to do is figure out what we need to do to get over into that liberate quadrant. So that's another activity I do with leaders is yes, identify where you naturally kind of tend to be. But when you're under stress and under pressure and getting more and more frustrated, what's your tendency? Do you pendulum swing somewhere to a different quadrant before getting to liberate?
I like it. I like it.
This is a tool that I use often. I call it one of our power tools. And it is incredibly transformational inside of teams and organizations. There's one particular brewery that I have worked with for a little over a year, and they have a protect culture. And that's one of their goals, though, for 2025. After having gone through all of the tools that we went through last year, the support challenge matrix being one of them, one of their main goals for 2025 is to as an organization as a whole, move into the liberate quadrant. And instead, because they realize that so many of their problems that they experience on a weekly basis with their people is due to the protect culture that they've created. Like as leaders, being in business for as long as they have, that's the culture that their employees have grown to expect. And now that they have the tools and the language to communicate more effectively, initially they were getting a little pushback from their people because they're like, this is new, this is weird. Like, it's going to take a little bit of time for their people to get on board and get settled in as to this is what you're going to experience now. We're not going to only tell you what you're doing well. We're actually going to hold you accountable and remind you regularly of the expectations that if you work here for this brewery and you wear the t-shirts and you wear the logo hats and all of that, this is what you're representing, and this is the culture that we're adopting. That we're going to bring you some challenge. We're going to communicate expectations, and we expect you to check your email every single week. B, expect you to not, be on your phone, in certain time. Just the daily things that they're starting to communicate more effectively now that they're not afraid to bring challenge and they're baking it into their rhythms. Sure. So would you say, Adam, that the support challenge matrix, you would naturally live potentially in that protect quadrant with? Yeah, I think so. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say the one thing I like to do is have people go through and maybe think of a relationship where they're in different quadrants for each one. And I can use myself as an example. I like to use my kids simply because I know, obviously, I'm leading them every single day, every single week. But there's one of my sons that I protect because he is my guy that wears his heart on his sleeve. He's very sensitive. He feels everything that goes on in our world, and I don't have to punish him in order to get him to feel remorse. Like he already feels remorse, so I know how sensitive he is. And so I tend to protect him more so than maybe some of the others. My one son that's very different than me, he's my oldest, but he is so different than me. I have to work really hard and be intentional to communicate with him regularly. And we have a carved out once a week time that we spend together. And it's partly due to his age. He's 13. So that middle school friction. So I'm definitely in the liberate quadrant with him because I'm so intentional on purpose. There's one son, my youngest, who is a lot like me. He's probably the most like me out of all my kids. And guess what? I see myself in him which makes me tend to dominate him a little bit. I bring him a lot of challenge because everything he does, I'm like, oh man, right? Like I'm subconsciously seeing myself in him. And so I naturally bring him challenge more so. So I have to be careful to make sure I'm calibrating encouragement for him if I'm not careful. Last but not least, unfortunately, I have a son that I have 4 boys. I have a son that I tend to, if I'm not careful, I can abdicate. And the only reason is because he's so self-sufficient. He is such an easy kid. He doesn't get in trouble. He doesn't really need anything from me. He just wants to do his Legos or read a book, or just like, he's just so laid back and easygoing that if I'm not careful, because he's not demanding things of me and requiring things of me, I have to be intentional to not just abdicate. I have to think, okay, what does he need from me? Does he need, all those different things. So I was going to ask you the same thing. Does any relationships come to mind? And you don't have to name names, obviously, if you don't want to, but put yourself in that tool.
No, for sure. I feel like there's a range of them. And when I was, back when I was managing people in different breweries or working with my children, I do remember thinking that when we had my oldest son, who is very clearly very strong-willed, very much going to do his own thing, very much going to learn the hard way. And that was all evident very, very early. You end up thinking, and especially as a new parent, you're like, what could we have done differently to make this easier, right? But first of all, you find that everybody kind of has a baseline program that they're running with, because we had the second one, and he was the most laid back thing on earth. He was the one that even as a toddler, you get him in the car for a 7-hour drive and he doesn't talk. He just looks out the window. You know what I mean? And they're just so different. And so, yeah, so actually one thing that I was thinking about, and something that I've had to build off of, is I've had to learn how to communicate 2 things, both praise and correction. And I found that there can be a link between the ways that should happen to be effective for me. So I would be interested in bouncing this off you. Sometimes I think through a challenge lens. I think that the communication needs to be timely and specific and honest. And I try to do my praise the same way. I say timely, especially with praise, because praise is the one that comes easily for me. So I will go ahead and praise. I saw something very specific that somebody did. That's a quality thing, and we're looking through a production lens right now. Before that day is over, it's either going to be a fist bump, a high five, and say, "Hey, I noticed that you did this. I appreciate that because," and then that was awesome, and then that's it. So I try to keep that in that range. But I've also found that there are some similarities between that challenge conversation as well, right? And we were kind of talking about those challenge conversations. Do you think that's a pretty good parallel between those two, having those things in common? Do you think that's a good way to approach that with somebody in both of those situations?
I think that's a very effective strategy for both, for the encouragement feedback, but then also the challenge or critique feedback. I think that what you said is timeliness. Yes, don't let it linger. It should be timely, whether it's the same day, same week, whatever your rhythms are. If you're working closely with somebody, then yeah, same day. If it's like, if you're able to do it right then. If there's somebody that's on your team that you're responsible for, but you don't work with them that day, then make sure it's the next day, right? So timely. Specificity is very important. Giving praise or critique in generalities is not liberating. You know, you need to be specific with what you appreciated or what you saw could be better and your expectations. So yes, specificity is another one in there. And what was the other one that you said? I thought there was three.
Timely, specific, and honest.
Oh yeah.
And because I think that sometimes for me, like being fully honest is it can be the challenging thing, right?
Sure.
When it's praise, it's maybe it's easy, and maybe it's just easy for me. But when it's the corrective conversation, when it's the challenge conversation, sometimes the honesty can be one of the more difficult portions.
Absolutely. Yeah. And not feeling like you need to pad it, you know, to be received well. So yes, we have a phrase that we use. It's called speaking the truth in love. You know, you can speak the truth kindly to the people that are around you. And that is also maybe a skill for both people, whether you're naturally in the protect or naturally in the dominate, you know, naturally. I think it's a learned skill to be able to speak the truth, because the people that naturally bring critique, they're being very honest, but it may not feel kind the way that they deliver it. Where the people that naturally bring encouragement, they're super kind, but they may be kind of trying to pad it or say it in a roundabout way as opposed to being direct. And so my encouragement to a lot of people is identify what your natural tendency is. Are you someone who needs to calibrate the kindness and love? And good chance people aren't ever going to question you. If you live in that quadrant, people aren't usually going to question whether you're honest. They already trust you because you are typically someone that speaks the truth. That's just a gift. So they're probably not ever going to question whether they trust you. But do they like you? That's the harder part, where the people that are more in that protect quadrant, you know, they like you. That's not the question at all. They like working with you, but can they trust you to speak the truth? Yeah. So it's those two different things. Yeah.
So another thing that makes me think about, and one of the things that I find years ago, so the first 10 years of my professional career, I taught at-risk kids. And I remember I went to a conference, and it was specifically like a behavioral management, like leadership type thing. And they made an analogy that I really liked. And the analogy that they made was, again, kind of through this rubric of it being timely, truthful, specific, things like that. They said that you actually have to, like, build up a balance of thinking of things like on a monetary standpoint or like a bank account standpoint. You need to, it's helpful to build up a balance of honest praise with someone. Because they say that when you sometimes have that, when they need the corrective conversation or the challenging conversation, that can kind of, knock things down a little bit. It's like when I do things on YouTube and I get 10 great comments and one bad comment, you think about the one bad comment, right?
Yeah.
What's your thought about that? Because I have tried to, in an authentic way, as a leader in the brewery, I really do try to praise in a sincere way, because I do know that at some point, in a way, it's almost like I feel as if, yes, it's truthful, but I'm also building up capital with them for when that time that I do need to take a withdrawal. I don't know how you feel about the language or whatever, but conceptually, what's your thought about that?
Yeah, I would agree. I think you're spot on. There's a lot of research behind that. I can't reference it off the top of my head as to like what they say, how many positive comments you have to make in order to make a negative comment. And I think that at first, like, and it really depends in your work environment. If you are working hand in hand with your people, like for instance, a brewing team, they're working hand in hand constantly. Yes. The bar staff working hand in hand constantly. But there's plenty of breweries that are so large that you need to communicate sometimes with team members that you only see maybe a couple of times a week or something. So there are different scenarios, and you have to be creative in the way that you're communicating sometimes. Now, if it's a relationship that you're working hand in hand with someone, then yes, building up that relational capital with a lot of positive comments, a lot of feedback when things are going well, which hopefully that's the case. Hopefully you're in the situation where things are going well more often than not. If that's not the case, then obviously it's more of a triage situation. Let's get you some help to figure out why you guys are in the situation you are. But for the majority of brewery teams, things are going well for the majority of the time, and there's some small things that need to be addressed. So there's a statement that I like to use, that there's no such thing as too much communication. It just doesn't exist from a leader to their team. It just doesn't exist. So introverts, that's a real challenge because they don't naturally speak first. They think about things, they analyze things, they maybe will go and put it into an email because they're much better communicating that way, and that's totally fine. You need to figure out as a leader, what does communication from you and your personality look like? But you also have to consider your team, the team that you are leading. What do they need? What are their personalities? And that's why we lean heavy into the 5 Voices personality tool to establish what kind of personalities do we have on the team, not just with the leaders, but with the people that you're working with, so that those leaders can be set up for success and know, my team actually prefers to be communicated with in this way or versus this way. And so I need to challenge myself to step out of my comfort zone and communicate in the way that it's going to be heard well, the most effectively. And so a lot of times that personality assessment that we use not only gives language for communicating more effectively, just like the Sport Challenge Matrix does, but it also breaks down those understandings of each other's personalities. And so for those introverts, learning how to communicate in general with over communicating, and not just, there's so many leaders that are introverts that I coach. They're like, yeah, sometimes I question whether or not I said something out loud or if I just said it inside. And they honestly don't know. And so often they find themselves asking their team, hey, did I communicate this with you? Or did I think I did and I never actually did? So there's a lot to think about through that. But yes, building up that relational capital is key.
So another question, as you were talking, I feel like because I've done some talks at conferences on leadership development, on career development, and I've had some when we get to the Q&A, I'll have people say, "Well, this sounds like an extrovert thing, right?" And so, and I think a lot of times people are used to leadership coming from extroverts because they're probably the first to speak, sometimes speaking without thinking and words just come out, right? And so sometimes it's assumed that you're just in that role, right? Sometimes the person to speak first sometimes gets pushed into that space. What would you tell somebody when talking about that concept of, the extrovert versus the introverted leader?
Yeah, such a good topic. I'm glad you asked. Yeah, we have a tool that we use, and the 5 Voices integrates into it and lays the groundwork for it. But there's a couple of different tools that we use that helps to frame what you're talking about because you're exactly right. There are a lot of extroverts that think out loud, right? Like if there's a thought that popped into their head, it's coming out of their mouth.
Yeah, that might be me.
It might be me too. But there are so many amazing ideas that get left on the table if those extroverted people on the team, whether they're leaders or they're not the leaders on the team, regardless, if those extroverts don't learn the skill of going last. So that we have within the 5 voices, when I integrate it inside of a team and inside of an organization, I of course teach them what they are so that they are speaking the language and they understand it. They know who they are, they know who they have on their team. But then we talk about the rules of team engagement. And the premise is that the quieter voices get to go first in a team meeting, and they get to share their ideas first, because so often the people that are the extroverted thinkers are the ones that go first all the time. And the thing is, the way those extroverted thinkers communicate, they communicate often in a very confident way. And so it sounds like the decision's already been made to everyone else around the table. And so when it comes to those quieter voices, when it comes their turn to share, often they're like, well, I mean, I guess this is what we're doing, because it sounds like they're so confident in what they just said that I guess this is what we'll do. And they get into the habit of not even speaking up or sharing because they don't naturally, say what they think. It takes them a little bit of time to put all their thoughts together. They love, I encourage people too, for leaders, if you have a specific topic that you're going to talk about in a team meeting, send out the questions ahead of time, ahead of the meeting, to give your introverts time to think about it and jot down their ideas. Because if you bring the ideas to the table in the meeting, thinking that everybody's going to be able to just ideate and share what they're thinking, you're not going to get the best out of your people. There are plenty of people around your table that need a little bit of thought prep time, and they need to get it down. And so I that's one tip and tool that I give them to use is to if you know you're going to be discussing something, send it out in advance, and that way everybody can come to the table prepared. Your extroverts are probably still not going to read it and do any note taking. They're just going to show up and do what they do anyways, but that's fine.
I feel like you've talked to some people that have employed me in the past. But no, that makes a lot of sense. And I do think the one of the things that I've had to work on throughout my life and continue to, and probably always will. The analogy might seem a little bit corny, but when we have these phones in our hands, there's one camera that's pointed at your face and the other camera that's going out. I noticed, me personally, I've spent a lot of my life with that camera focused on me, and not looking out. And there's multiple levels on which that can be troublesome, right? You can not see other people's perspectives. You can miss beautiful things that are happening around you. And so, yeah, definitely. And I don't know if that's an extrovert thing. I'm sure it's more layered than that.
It is, yeah,
but,
for sure.
but yeah, that's something.
No, that's a really good insight. And I can identify with that as well. Prior to having all of the tools that I have now, absolutely. A lot of it is taking a hard look in the mirror and using the tools as that lens and say, oh man, yeah, I've been that person before that has maybe shut other voices down unintentionally, like completely unintentionally. Right. But there are certain personalities that really hate silence, where there are plenty of personalities that actually thrive in silence. And that's when their best comes out. And so I'm always challenging those people in the team to know who you have in your team, employ the rules of team engagement, and you're going to get the best out of your people. And so, you had somewhat alluded to the question though, introvert leaders versus extrovert leaders. And yes, it's much more layered than that, but so many amazing leaders are those quieter voices. And my challenge to every leader that is a louder voice is, guess what? You probably don't have the influence you think you do inside of your organization.
Mhm.
My challenge to those dominant, more confident, more outspoken leaders is, guess what? Find the people in your team that are those quieter, more dependable, trustworthy people that everyone else in your organization looks to as to what they're doing because they are so trustworthy. Get them on board, get them bought into whatever you're trying to, whatever initiative, healthy initiative you're looking to push out. And guess what? Maybe you, as the more loud, dominant leader, shouldn't be the one to communicate it. You should maybe give that authority of communication to that other person that is more of that quieter voice. Because guess what? When they speak, other people listen.
Mhm.
It's not
Mhm.
because they're so used to hearing you speak all the time. You need to actually empower someone else that is one of those quieter voices to start to communicate to the masses, because there's percentages that I could rattle off as to, like, those dominant voices, they typically gravitate towards leadership. Yes, because A, they don't question their ability to do so. B, they're able to think in the moment and extrovert their thoughts. But the thing is, they don't always have the best ideas. Some of the best ideas and influence comes elsewhere. And if they're going to be the best possible leader and take their organization to levels that they've never been able to do before, they need to empower and give authority to communication authority out to some of those quieter voices in the organization.
Mm. Mm. Well, yeah, definitely. I love it. Do you have, because I think we have, how many slides do you have for us to look at today?
It's just the one, the
Okay,
tool,
okay.
that one tool. I just figured I'd keep it simple, and that way,
Absolutely.
if our listeners want to go ahead and take it, download it, print it out, have their people scatter plot them, that's really the one thing that I think is super useful. If they want to teach it to their people, that's totally fine as well. We do have a lot of resources online that people could be tapping into and using with their team. If they ever wanted to know how to do that, they can reach out and I can help them with that. But
no, for sure. And so as we were talking, one of the things that I found kind of around this topic is I've had people say, well, okay, this is what the culture is like in my workplace. It could definitely be better, or maybe it's very unhealthy or whatever. But because they are not in a managerial position, they feel as if some of this advice is for leaders, managers only, right? Or for supervisors. If you had somebody that just came to you and said, well, listen, I just work in the cellar in the brewery, how does this stuff pertain to me? What would your advice be to them?
my advice would be, well, how are you leading yourself? Because that's where it all actually ends up starting in the first place, is how you lead yourself is going to affect your job outcomes. It's going to affect all of your relationships, whether you're in a leadership position by title or not. We're all influencing people in some way, whether you believe that or not. We are either influencing in a positive way and making the world around us a better place, or we're doing the opposite. We're kind of bringing people down or around us. And so figuring out how are you leading yourself internally? And so I can easily use that same tool and say, inside of your own mind, the self-talk that you're hearing every single day, is it dominating? Are you telling yourself, man, I'm never going to get this right? Like, I am so worthless. I am never going to lose the weight, or I am never going to start that exercise program. It's just that negative self-talk, and I'm dominating myself constantly. Or am I abdicating? Like, I'm just like, it doesn't matter. Nothing matters anyways. It doesn't, nothing's going to change. Like, just all of that. I'm not bringing myself support. I'm not bringing myself challenge. I'm just kind of existing. Or am I giving myself a free pass? Am I saying to myself, it's probably good enough. Like, man, I've been doing all of this work and, I don't get any feedback regardless. And so therefore, I'm just going to kind of do the minimum necessary to get by. And so I'm actually giving myself too much leeway and credit and not bringing myself enough challenge. Or last but not least, are you being a liberator to yourself? Are you saying, you know what? I am unique. I do have talents and gifts and a skill set that organizations need and my company needs. And I'm going to actually challenge myself to go and complete that, whatever it is, that competency that was suggested to me. And I'm going to discipline myself to get that done before the next month or something like that, and challenge yourself. Or, you know what? I've been late to work the past 6 times in the past month. I think that next month I'm going to try to not be late to work at all. Like, right. Bringing yourself a challenge, that's liberating yourself that yes, you have value to bring, but yes, where can I be better? And so that's what I would say to people that feel like, well, I'm not in a leadership position. And so what does this really matter? We're all leading ourselves first, no matter if you are a leader, if you're just an employee. We're all showing up every single day with head trash that we need to figure out what to do with, and being a liberator to ourselves inside of our own beings is where I would say all of us need to start, whether you're a leader or not.
Sure. I wondered, because I'm somebody that I like to read, listen to a wide range of things, and some of the stuff that I listen to is on the leadership, personal development side. So just for you, are there any books, podcasts, etc., things that you like from a reference standpoint that kind of help build some of those professional leadership skills?
Sure. Yeah. I have a handful of things that I would recommend. If you're interested in personality and I referenced the 5 voices. There's a 5 voices book. So if you're a book reader, you can easily do that on audio or buy the actual book. So that would be a great place to start. There's another book called The 100X Leader that talks about, becoming 100% healthy yourself, or at least moving in that direction. But then the X stands for multiplication. How do you multiply that health out to the people around you? And so becoming that leader. So those are the books that I would recommend. I know I also recommended when we were at the OCBA conference, I told you about the book 10X is easier than 2X. And so anybody that's an entrepreneur that is trying to create something of value, that you have this vision in your mind, and how do I take it and make it bigger? That 10X is easier than 2X book is incredible. It literally broke my brain into thinking a different way than what I see everybody doing. So that one is such a good book if you're an entrepreneur. Those would be my top lists for books. Now, as far as a podcast go, there's the Leaders Toolkit podcast. It's a really short episode one. It's all like 15 to 20 minute long episodes. But it teaches a tool like what I taught you guys today with the Support Challenge Matrix. It teaches a different tool, and it's specifically for leaders inside of organizations. Like, you don't have to be an owner of an organization. You just have to be a leader inside of an organization. And it really gives you a language and lots of tools to be able to go and use right away. So those are some of my favorite things to read or listen to. That is a good place to start. The last thing I'll say is that there's also the 5 Voices app. Like, if you have an Apple phone, an iOS, you can look up the 5 Voices app. and download it. It's not available yet for Android, but that's coming. That the app is more helpful. Like if you want all of your team to be able to see one another and see each other's personalities and learn about each other, you can click on another one of your contacts and it'll give you an insight about your colleague or about your spouse or whoever you have as contacts on the app. So that's pretty cool resource as well. That's a lot of fun to play with.
Nice. So just to zoom out a little bit, if we were to go back in time and if you were to go back in time and have a beer with 25-year-old Amy, what career life advice would you give her?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would tell her to not be afraid to slow down. That not everyone around you goes at the pace that you go at, and that's okay. And actually slowing down at the pace of those that are most important to you is not a bad thing. And so that was always kind of a challenge for me, is that I am a really, really fast mover, whether it is with tasks or whether it's planning or communicating. Learning to slow down is a skill set for me.
Sure.
It's not something that came naturally. It was something that I needed to learn over time. And I feel like that was more in my 30s that I learned that. So if I was talking to my 25-year-old self, that would definitely be something that she probably would ignore.
Well, the funny thing is thinking back about that, and just more recently in the last several years, I've heard more and more stuff, but I look back and I think about myself in my 20s, and it was like, I don't know, I don't think there was anything in my head. Like, I know that I had to, my wife and I, we got married in our early 20s. I knew that I was teaching at the time. I know I needed to get up, go to work, come home. And then that was basically what I knew I was supposed to be doing. You know what I mean? And so like, there was all these other things going on around me that were just like completely escaping me. You know what I mean? So yeah, I can, that whole notion of talking to younger you. And then I'm now hitting the thing where I have to watch and monitor how I would like to assist my now adult children as they're in that space. One of my favorite things, and he does not listen to this, my oldest told me he was getting ready to move like away for his job after college. And at the time, he did not have a vehicle, an apartment, and nothing was packed, and he was leaving in 2 days. This is the one that has to learn it on his own. And he came up to me 2 days before he's leaving, and he goes, "It's all coming together." And it took every fiber in my being just to not laugh. But it is funny. So like, when I see now my son in that same time frame or in that same space, that same life space, it's tricky for me to navigate how to handle that. I try, actually, things come much better from mom than they do from me with him. And so sometimes we follow it that way, but that's just my little tangent on the 20s.
Yes.
So
one of my mentors talks about how true influence doesn't actually start until your 50s anyways. And to think about that, if I would have told my 25-year-old self that, oh man, I wouldn't have believed it. Like, in your 20s, you just think, well, of course I have influence. Why wouldn't I have influence, right? And so when you get older and a bit more mature and have lived a few different scenarios in your life, you start to believe, oh yeah, actually that's encouraging to know that true influence, the most influence that we'll have in our lifetime is probably, it doesn't really start until after the age 50. And so that's just a different mindset around, how we can handle leadership in our world.
Yeah, and even just having patience with yourself too, right? Because I know like there's always like, well, okay, I need to grow, I need to grow, I need to grow, I need to be a success, or whatever those metrics are that you track. And there's, I mean, almost always there's always more time. You know, I'm kind of going into this next chapter. You know what I mean? And that at one point you have that thought of, oh, I'm in my mid to later 40s. Well, there's still a lot of time. You know what
Lots
I
of
mean?
time.
There's still a lot of time.
Absolutely.
Having that
Yeah.
patience with yourself for sure.
Agreed.
So is there anything that you want to talk to us about as far as anything new, upcoming, stuff that you have going on with craft leadership?
Yeah, sure. With Craft, if you want to check out who we are, and you can, of course, book a call to talk about, what's going on in your world, in your leadership, and in your organization that may be challenging. You can book a call from our site. It's craftleadership.co. And so you'll be able to just kind of check us out and do a little bit of research there. But we are working within breweries all over the country, and really just it is a customizable thing because every brewery is a different size. Every brewery has different departments. Some are large and distributing, some are smaller, so every brewery has a little different need. And the nice thing is all of our resources are so customizable to what's going to fit. And so that really is what we're doing, is just kind of when people hear of us and they're interested, we do have just an initial call. We figure out what it is that you guys are trying to solve and what your reality is, and then put you on a path that not only is going to help you solve those issues over time and grow, but also fits your budget, because that's the one thing that we know within most breweries. You're not often you're not already working on leadership development. You're initially, you get the brewery up and going for a handful of years. And then once you start to grow to a certain size, then you start to experience some of those issues that need to be solved within your people. And at that point, then it's nice to pull someone like us in, and we can match you up with what's going to solve you best and what's going to meet the budget that you have to solve. So that's my encouragement. Go check us out on the website, book a call if you want to have that discussion. And so we're always excited about meeting new breweries across the country. The one thing that's coming up that is in Ohio here is the Women's Summit in Cincinnati here on April the 5th, which is a Saturday. At Urban Artifact. It's called Pomona's Abundance. And so it really is celebrating women in the brewery industry. It's not just for women. The event is not just for women. Anybody can come and drink some amazing beer that was brewed by women on National Women's Day, and participate. And we're going to have a panel of women in brewers. Some of them are the head brewers. Some of them are owners. Some of them are general managers, but we're going to have a nice little panel, and I'm going to moderate that panel. And you're going to get to hear from and we're going to celebrate all the women that in our world that are doing some amazing things in the brewing industry. So that'll be fun. If you want to check that out, you can go to, let me see, it's the ohiocraftbeer.org/Pomona's Abundance is where you can learn more about that. So
awesome.
That's about all I can think of. Well, the last thing I will say too is we do have certifications and things like that, and even badges. So if you're a brewery that just really wants to kind of internally drive some things and say, hey, I've got a GM, I've got 2 key leaders. I wonder what I could be doing to get them a few more tools under their belt in a really easy way. And so purchasing a badge, and I can put the link in, give you the link to put in the notes for that. But you can easily purchase a badge for your person or your leader that they're going to go through a course and come out on the other side with a certificate and a ton of tools at their disposal to be doing this kind of on their own. If you're not wanting to pull in a coach consultant, if you're just kind of looking to level up some education with a course or something like that, you can easily do those as well.
Love it. Love it. Well, Amy, it was a blast having you on today. I really appreciate it, and appreciate everybody out there listening. You know, we do talk almost every time I jump on one of these that we do like to have a career focus with what we're doing with the channel, right? Because I think so often we have the goal of getting in here, making beer, becoming a brewer, becoming a head brewer, but we're actually looking to build careers. So I like to have conversations like this with folks like Amy. As always, actually not as always just yet, go ahead and check out, and you can follow Craft Leadership at craft.leadership on Instagram. So give them a follow there. And I will have, next week will be no podcast. I will be kicking back a little bit with some buddies watching the first weekend of the March Madness basketball tournament. But I'll be back in your ears the week after with another pod that I'll be posting about shortly. So just stay tuned on Instagram. Remember to like and share all the stuff. I appreciate that. And be good to your people, and we'll catch up with you next time. Amy, if you can stick on for just a second when I jump off stream. Amy, thanks again, and I'll see you all later.
Thanks, Adam.